This is the Texas Land Guys podcast, hosted by brothers Tim Dosch and Tom Dosch. With their partners David Marshall and Trip Rich, they have built DMRE, the leading land brokerage in Texas. With decades of experience brokering deals between landowners and real estate developers, they take you inside the deals that move the market.
Well, welcome to the Texas Land Guys podcast, and happy Thanksgiving. I think this is always probably one of my favorite weeks of the year. And Tim and I have a very special guest today. We have our dad, Jim Dosch, joining the podcast. So Dad, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, Dad. It's fun just getting to sit across from you, and we get to spend a lot of time talking about giving and 100X, and getting to do this on the podcast together is really special. So
looking forward to it.
I think it's a perfect segue into what we'll all be doing on Thursday, getting to spend time with family. I know family, football, and food is always a big part of Thanksgiving. And obviously what we're doing on Thanksgiving is we're thankful for all that God's provided. And that's something that I think, Tim, you and I have a lot of fond memories of growing up.
Oh, yeah.
I still associate Thanksgiving probably the most with Montana and our time there, just because I always loved the fact that it was snowing outside. And it was like a real wintry Thanksgiving. I remember when we first moved from Montana, I'll probably skip Midland because we went from Montana to Midland and we weren't there that long. But when we got to Houston, it was like so difficult because it was 90 degrees on Thanksgiving. And it was like, there was no fall colors. It was 90 degrees. And it took me a while to get used to what it's like to have Thanksgiving in Texas. But
yeah, it's definitely tough. I love Montana and the cold and the snow and everything. And that was a neat time for our family, being there. There's a lot of special memories from that time. I think just kind of starting out, what we wanted to talk about is, so we have this ministry called 100X, this nonprofit we started back in 2018. So right as we were starting DMRE and getting going with that, we wanted to really have a designated giving platform for our giving. But I think what was on our heart was also including our friends and including people, maybe some of our clients, people that had wanted to be generous, wanted to give to these important causes that they were passionate about, but didn't know maybe where to give, or maybe had been burned in the past, maybe money hadn't been used properly. And so we had this idea of starting this ministry. We wanted to call it something other than like the DMRE Giving Fund, because we didn't want it to just be us. We wanted people to want to be a part of it, where they could have some ownership and get to share in it and not just be about us. And because that was, part of the vision behind it was including more and more people in this giving. And I think the timing was so providential. We were talking before we started recording, Dad, you'd had a long career at ConocoPhillips, 36 years. And you were getting out of that and really looking at, okay, I don't want to necessarily be retired and not do anything. I want to be productive and do something. And I want to do something for the kingdom. And at the same time, you've been involved in the master's program, which we've talked a lot about in this podcast. And that was very impactful for you of, what is my calling? Where does God want to use me? And so maybe just kind of talk about that, about kind of that beginning point and what was going on in your heart and as you were making that transition.
Yeah, the end of my career in the energy industry was really good, really enjoyed it. But when I basically left ConocoPhillips, it was a period of, what's next? And I'd been through the master's program, and really in the master's program really was confronted with this whole idea of success to significance. In other words, career to calling. Was really struggling to find what's my calling? What does God really want me to do? We think about the Apostle Paul, he was a great tent maker, I'm sure, but when you think about his impact as the greatest evangelist the world has ever known to the Gentiles, I mean, that was his calling. And so I too wanted to have a focus on what did God really want me to do. So the opportunity came forward with 100X Harvest. You guys started the nonprofit, and your goals were to reach out to your clients and to build this feeling of stewardship, to really look at what we could do. One of the things about the master's program that's really critical is all of us can make a difference. So both of you wanted to make a difference along with David Marshall. And it was so exciting for me as your father to see that, to see your heart for giving and to serve others, that it was a real pleasure for me to come out of the chaotic energy industry, day-to-day grind, and come into the 100X Harvest, which is truly an eternal opportunity to work with ministries, to come alongside and encourage them in their projects to be as fruitful as possible. And I like the idea, the name, 100 times harvest. You think about the Bible in Mark chapter 4, where some of the seed, the parable of the sower, some of the seed fell on good soil, and that soil reproduced 100-fold. And, when you think about the business environment, there's always interest in leveraging your money and seeing it grow. And I was so excited in the kingdom space through 100 times harvest to be able to work with ministries in the same fashion, for them to see their giving leveraged to its maximal impact. And we were able to see that. And like I tell people often, this is the best job I've ever had. It's not that I didn't enjoy what I did before, but this job, this opportunity, directing 100X Harvest, really allows me to do something really significant that I believe has eternal ramifications. So it's been a great opportunity for me.
Well, we're really thankful for just your willingness to do it, Dad. I mean, a lot of people in your position, they don't really need to work just because you worked for so long. And you're at a stage in life where you could kind of do whatever you want and wouldn't need to have something that's a commitment and a responsibility. We really appreciated it because, before we started 100 Times Harvest, we got to do a lot of traveling together, and Tim had been overseas quite a bit. I had been overseas. You had been overseas with us with different organizations and ministries. And we had so many organizations coming in and meeting with us that were wanting to connect, and whether it was funding or just needing connections or advice or whatever it was. And just with Tim and I growing DMRE and now Ascent, and then our families and having a lot of just other responsibilities, it was hard for us to do the day-to-day. We still love to be involved, still love to meet with ministries and do that, but we just can't always be available. And so you've really come in and added so much value and just allowed us to leverage your skill set, which is amazing just after all that time in the corporate world. And so it's pretty amazing to go back to when you and I were in the master's program together, because we graduated from that together, and to think about you were trying to decide where and what was going to be next. And then that, this was provided. And now we're 7.5 years into having 100 Times Harvest, and pretty neat to just see the number of people that have come alongside just from a giving standpoint, and to also see a lot of the really exciting opportunities that we've been able to be a part of, both by just funding, and then you and Mom have gone on a lot of trips just to help with the evaluation of just different organizations. And so in a really short period of time, a lot has happened. And I think it's really just something that Tim and I are really thankful for, that we know that you're responsible for that and leading that in a way that we just wouldn't have the capacity to do. One
thing comes to mind. I know Jason Baker's been on this program, but on the podcast. And I remember traveling with you, Tom, and Jason to Istanbul so many years ago. One of our first trips that you're mentioning that Mom and I took, and Jason took me aside during that trip and said, Jim, you and your wife can take advantage of these types of opportunities if you choose to. There's a lot of ministries that would love to have you come along and encourage their work. And we took Jason up on that, and with both of your encouragements, and I can think back to just how I never would have dreamed just following that encouragement from Jason, and then taking advantage and actually going to ministries and asking if we could travel with them just to see the work and really get a better feel for the global church. So I'm so appreciative of your encouragement, both of you, and also people like Jason that said, yes, you can do that. So we did that, and have had an opportunity to do that in many different places around the world. And those trips have been so enriching to us, because God has spoken to us about our relationship with Him. But just as important, He's helped us meet people that truly are serving Him in a very powerful way that's been a big impact on us. So we've really enjoyed that opportunity, and it's been a real blessing to us. And I thank both of you for that opportunity, because both of you were encouraging to me. I remember I talk about the master's program and what an impact that has been in my life, but Tim will remember he was after me to do the master's program for quite some time, and I kept telling him, Tim, I don't have time to do the master's program. I'm just too busy at work. I can't get away. And believe it or not, Tim persisted and kept encouraging, and then I had the opportunity to go to the program, 3-year program with Tom, and participate. So thankful for both of you, because you've encouraged me to really open my eyes, get out there and open my eyes and let God speak to me, where I was somewhat resistant at first because I just didn't think I had time for it. So thank you both for that.
That's really neat. Well, one thing that I was thinking about as you're talking, Dad, is what's been unique about 100X Harvest is, and this kind of comes from Steve Caliper, who has been a real influence on our nonprofit and just on all of us, I think, with being involved in ministries and giving, and being, his ministry is called Doing Good Better. And so he's trying to help Christians be plugged into the kingdom and really help what he calls move the needle. And so what we want to do with 100X Harvest is not just give to some, ministries kind of general fund, or which is what happens a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, here's $3,000 or something that just goes to some kind of general fund of a ministry. You don't really know where it goes. But how do we come alongside ministries where we believe in the vision, we believe in the leadership, we see what they're doing and the impact they're having? How do we help take them to the next level? How do we really move the needle, which for us, a lot of times looks like a larger gift. So maybe it's $50,000 or $100,000 or $150,000, but it's for a specific purpose. We're going to help them hire some people, or a person that's going to do something that expands the ministry. We're going to help them building somewhere, or open up. We've done a lot of Bible translation. We're going to do a recording of a Bible in someone's heart language, new heart language. And so all these different projects that we have done around the world, and also a lot in the United States, they've been really impactful, where we can really track the, to some extent, you can never fully track the impact, but you can get a feel for, this money was given, this is what happened with the money, this is the impact, and then be able to share that, both with us and then also the people that have been involved giving with us. That's been really, really neat.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, Tim. When we started 100 Times Harvest, Tom's already alluded to this, we were reacting to people that had come to us and said, I just don't know who to give to. I want to give, I just don't know who to give to. There's so many ministries out there. And, I give money, but I never hear anything back. I never know what happened until they ask me again for money. So we recognized that was an issue. So we decided to be very transparent on these projects that you referenced, Tim, so that when we would go back to the donors and give them feedback on here's how the project went, and to be as transparent as possible. Sometimes the projects go extremely well, beyond what we ever could have imagined. Sometimes it's tougher and they don't go as well. But the point was, we wanted to be transparent to let people know what was happening to their dollars that they were donating. And, all of us want a return on our investment. When we think about business opportunities, we always look for a return. And it's the same thing in the kingdom space. We want to work very diligently in the kingdom of God to do the very best that we can. So we do look for ministries that handle their finances well, that treat their people right, that have high character leaders, that follow through, they get back to us with information, and that stay focused on their mission and they don't drift. So giving that feedback back to donors has been very helpful. And today, we have had over 100 donors to 100 Times Harvest, and we're right about at the $8 million giving level since 2018. So God has really blessed the ministry, and a lot of different people have been involved in it. So when both of you were thinking about starting this 100 Times Harvest, you were looking to include your clients, and that's been a success because many of your clients have walked with us and stood with us.
Yeah, Tim, you and I were talking the other day about the blessing of generosity, and maybe we'll transition into maybe some of the values that we wanted to thank Dad that we've learned from him over the years. But the first being generosity. And I think you made the comment that you were reading something that talked about how when someone spends money on their self, like, you buy a new car, buy a new house, or it could be like a new watch. I mean, it could be anything. It could be a new pair of pants. But it's like there's some satisfaction and joy and happiness in that. But there's so much more when you actually do something for someone else. And it's how God's made us. It's how we're hardwired. And as you were telling me that the other day, I was thinking back on things that I've bought for myself versus like things that I've done for other people. And I was like, wow, it's so true. Like when I recall, I don't normally recall like, oh, I got that car, I got that thing. I recall like, and it was really special that, Jackie and I sacrificed and did X, Y, Z. And I think that we have experienced the joy of that. And I can trace that all the way back to Dad, to you and Mom, just growing up and knowing you were never saying like, this is how much money we're giving to different causes, but we always knew that you were. Like we saw you. We saw you at church. It was back in the days when like the plate was being passed, or there was the box in the back. It's a little different now, but we saw that. And then we also, I remember, Pastor Scott Gilchrist in Oregon, incredible teacher. You really wanted his sermons on the radio in Montana. And so I remember he was on the radio in Montana. And I understood as a little kid that was partially because, or solely because you guys invested in him being able to be on the radio there. And just little things like that. There were missionaries we supported. There were causes that you were giving to, but it wasn't like, here's $5 here and there. Like I knew that you and mom were sacrificing, and the Lord's worked in my heart and Jackie's heart. And it's not that as soon as we were on our own, we just immediately were really generous. I remember there was a time where we had student debt, and there were a lot of reasons where it was like, we really just can't be generous. And then it was really, I just think the foundational value I had from you. And then Tim, you were a huge encouragement in this area because you had that same foundational value. And I remember, Tim, you just challenged me in saying, it's biblical and it's obedience. It's walking in discipleship to be giving. And you have to be doing that. It can't be, I'll do it someday, or I'll do it when I have a certain amount of money. It's like, you got to be doing it now. We're supposed to be giving joyfully and sacrificially. And it can be seen as a really negative thing, but we've experienced it as a really incredibly joyful, impactful thing, because you see what it has done for other people and just getting to be a part of it. It's been incredible. And then to think, we went from that just kind of individual obedience over time to being encouraged and challenged through the master's program. I remember really being challenged in there by stories about people that were reverse tithers. They're giving 90%. They're keep living off 10 and things like that were just mind blowing, because it's so against the concept of, I'm going to make this much money and this much money and this much money, and I'm just going to add all these different things to my life. And I think that is really an impactful value in my life, that now we see the fruit of that being 100 times harvest. And the three of us getting to be a part of that together is really special. And I'd love to hear from both of you, for the person that might be listening, that it's really hard to want to go, I was going to say write a check, but it's not really write a check anymore. But it's really hard to give money to something, because it's like, if I give, $100 or $5,000 or $10,000, like maybe a small amount of money doesn't matter. And maybe if I give a lot, I could have bought something for my family, or I could have done something else. I don't understand why I would sacrifice. Just speaking to that a little bit, because it shouldn't be seen as a negative thing. I think all of us have experienced the very positive side of that.
Yeah, I think it's funny you brought that up, Tom, because I was actually thinking of the exact same thing as Dad was talking. And there was actually a secular podcast I was listening to, and they were talking about how when you buy something for yourself, the first time you buy that thing, there's this little dopamine hit, and you get this little kind of spurt of joy and enjoyment, and you love it for a little bit, no matter what it is. But that goes away over time. You adapt to that, and then if you buy the same thing again, there's literally no happiness bump that you get from that. But they were saying that when you give to someone in need, or when you give to a charity or a nonprofit, especially one that you're connected with and you believe in what they're doing, that sense of happiness and joy that you get from that giving is still there even 10 years later. And this was like a scientific study where they were, surveying people and looking at, the difference and impact that it has. And it is pretty crazy when you think about it, because it almost doesn't make sense, especially for people in our business that are making a lot of money, having a lot of success. And you start talking about, there's people that are making $1 million or a couple $1 million, and, you start talking about giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that, it just seems crazy. I mean, you could go buy an investment property with that, or you could go, buy an extra car, or you could, go on some crazy vacations or whatever. You think about how you could use that. But when you look at the truth, that if you do that, if you go spend that on yourself, you're not going to increase your joy. You're not going to increase your happiness in a meaningful way. You may actually get more depressed and discouraged, because you're not going to find fulfillment in that. But if instead you actually, especially if you're a believer, you connect to your heart and what God is doing, and you say, you know what, there's this kids' school in a difficult part of town that is doing an amazing job helping these low-income kids, or there's Star of Hope that's helping, these homeless kids, or, you guys have been involved in Charm Ministries, which is a prison ministry here in Texas, or maybe it's something around the world. There's all kinds of ministries we're a part of. The impact that you get to see, like my family and I going to Colombia and getting to work with these kids in these really poor areas, and just the joy of that. I mean, it's so much better than any vacation I can go on or any car I can buy or anything like that. But you have to take that step to actually do it. And it's going to be hard at first, and it's going to feel crazy at first. And so I just challenge our listeners to think about that wherever you are, and no judgment here. We all have had to struggle through that and go from maybe not really getting it and then starting to slowly start giving and then increase giving over time and see the blessing and benefit of that. But it's well worth it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I learned in the master's program was that God owns it all. We're stewards, and when that starts to sink into your mind, where you really start to understand that, you realize that what He's asked us to do is to steward it on His behalf. It's His, and not to cling to it. What Tim said is really true, though. We all kind of go through this period of wanting to cling and hold on, but once we give, it is exactly like Tim said. It really opens up your heart to more opportunities to give. You get excited about the impacts and the fruit that's caused in people's lives when they just have maybe just that little bit extra to push a project through that's going to benefit a lot of people. So both Tim and Tom, you and Tim have both encouraged me greatly in this area, because I've watched your lives and how God has been working in your hearts and how giving and generous you are. And that's been a real encouragement to your mom and I. And of course, my wife, Holly, she's always wanting to give. And she's a great encouragement on me too, because I need that. Even though I know the truth, it's all God's, I need to remember He wants us to give back to Him. And we're blessed richly when we do that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think
having your spouse supporting you is something that I think the three of us almost could take for granted, because our spouses all really support us in this. But I think that being able to do it together is really important too. Because if you don't, then there's a tendency where the other person in the relationship may not understand, And so we try to include our wives in these conversations and giving, and them understanding the impact as well and getting to be a part of it. For all three of us, our wives have gotten to meet with a lot of these ministries, gotten to travel with us. They know how incredible this is. But we understand it's hard if it's, the husband or the wife is at this ministry thing or getting this opportunity, and then the other one's not there. That can be difficult sometimes. And there can be a tug of like, well, if you give to that, are we not going to be able to like redo the kitchen, or are we not going to be able to go on that vacation, and I don't understand why we would do that. And so being able to try to be aligned in that is a really special thing.
Yeah, maybe to play out that, Tom, that's such a great point, because there can be a lot of conflict. And we've even had that with some of our friends where it's like, I want to give, but my wife is like, why are we giving all this money? Or maybe it's vice versa. The wife wants to give and the husband doesn't want to give. But I think what's helped all three of us in our marriage is actually going and on some of these trips and seeing these ministries out in the field, or you could even just volunteer with the ministry in your community. When you do that as a couple and you start to see the impact and you start to see what's happening, like for Chris and I, getting to go to Africa with Children's Cup and getting to see these little kids who had AIDS and, feeding kids and just all the stuff that we experienced there was so impactful for our marriage early on, to be like, we want to support this. Like, we want to help these kids. We want to help this ministry in this community. And so it helped us get on the same page kind of from the beginning. And I was just going to say, going back to these values, Dad, that we were really thankful that you've imparted to us, even though it was something I had to grow in. And I think for anybody, it's kind of hard, like giving away your money, what you see as your money, even though, like you said, it's our stewardship. It wasn't a completely foreign concept because of your leadership, and because it was something that just growing up, you guys just said, hey, we're going to give back to the Lord. We're going to tithe. You explained that to us. You taught us the biblical foundation for that. So that helped a lot, because I think if I hadn't had that kind of an upbringing, it would have been a bigger struggle to start being generous and start giving, because I think it's completely counterintuitive to what a normal person would think that they should be doing with their finances.
Yeah, and I think I would highlight again what you just said, the fact that if you're a little reluctant and you're not sure about this, and if it's just really a difficult concept to be giving, to really take advantage and get engaged, either an opportunity through your church or a ministry, and really firsthand go and experience. And I think that you will find that you look differently at the whole situation after you do that. So I'd encourage you to do that. And I know that it was a significant of importance to Holly and I when we started to travel and see things that we had never really understood before and had our eyes open. So I would highly encourage that.
It always changes you. You know, we always think we're going for the people, and we are, but it ends up changing us, I think, a lot of times more than we think maybe the impact we have. But just in a line of kind of going through these values, we wanted to go through another one that comes to mind for me is hard work. And that's something, Dad, that you've always been a very hard worker. Tom and I were talking this week about, you know, you were always, by the time we woke up in the morning, whenever we woke up, however early, you were always gone already. You were always at work and worked really hard and modeled that for us in your work with Conoco. But then also the stories of you working hard, putting yourself through college. You got a hauling business, we're doing physical manual labor. And that was just something that, you know, I think growing up, we realized the importance of that. You talked about the importance of that. And I remember as soon as I turned, 14 and a half or so, and I could get a job, you encouraged me, go get a job, go start working. And that was that's been something that's benefited me my whole life. And I really am thankful to you for that. I know, Tom, you share the same thing.
Yeah, I think that one of the very first things when we were talking about some of these values was hard work. And I was telling Tim, I think a lot of what we've learned from you, Dad, would be considered like traditional values. And one of them would be the importance of hard work. Another one's going to be like the importance of keeping your word. That was always something that you talked about a lot. But with hard work, you would leave at like 4:30 in the morning, and we would just see that every day. But then you were always home for dinner. And we always were together as a family, and you prioritized that. You had 7 kids. You were trying to support a large family. We saw you, sacrifice a lot and always be willing to kind of do whatever you needed to do. You're never complaining about like having to work. It was life is going to be, you got to work. And we saw that, and you modeled that for us. And I remember the same thing, getting a job as soon as I was legally able to. And even working before that, we were working for neighbors, and I remember some of the jobs Tim was doing, me being 8 years younger, and just seeing Tim do a lot of like physical labor for neighbors, for Mr. Daines in Montana, some like crazy jobs for $5 an hour or something. But just,
probably less than that.
We were maybe not making a lot of money in these early jobs. I remember working 50 hours a week all summer as a lifeguard, making $5.25 an hour. And even though, there were probably other things I could have done and made more money, and maybe there would have been a way to work less and make more money, what that taught me was really valuable. And us being able now as entrepreneurs, owning our business and having to have gone through some really difficult times in the market, us having that hard work ethic that we have, and realizing like, Tim, you're on like mid 40s now, I'm late 30s. And we realize the importance of still working hard. It's like, that's just part of life. I think that'll always be ingrained in us. And it's something that I really want to teach my kids, because I think now, especially just with all the technology and this belief, I think that you can make money, maybe not having to work that hard or get lucky, or just use, some new concept and create your own little business and never really have to go have a real job. And so I think that that's something I really want my kids to learn. It's just the importance of putting the hours in, the hard work, manual labor, all those things.
Yeah. One thing I wanted you to respond to that, Dad, but one thing I wanted to also commend you for is, you weren't a workaholic. You worked really hard, and you did that because you wanted to do a good job, for your company, and you wanted to fulfill your job and be responsible and be conscientious. But you also were at all of our games. You coached us. You, like Tom said, you were home for dinner. We had family dinners. We'd have Bible study together at night. We'd read Bible storybooks together as kids. So it wasn't like hard work. And I'm just, because a lot of men, it's like if they do work hard, then they're just, like I know you also could have been promoted more had you traveled more. And not that you didn't travel because you had to travel for your job, but there were opportunities, especially to maybe, go do things overseas and stuff that could have been good to promote yourself in the business within the company. But you also knew that would steal from your family. And so I think that I'm really thankful for that you had this balance of, I'm going to work really hard and be dedicated to my job and honor my company. But I also am going to really desire to be balanced and be there for my kids and be there for my wife and have us, you also were always leading at church and an elder and teaching. And so you had all these other things you were doing, not just work. And so that I want to just point that balance out.
Well, I think about that whole issue of working hard, and I've sure seen that in both of your lives, just with the creation of DMRE and just with your families. And I remember my dad, Tom, you mentioned the hauling business that I had going through college, light hauling, moving, landscaping. And I remember him telling me he had done the same thing with another guy when he was about my age. And he said, Jim, it's all about finishing the job and making sure that when you leave the site, it looks great. In other words, you got to sweep, you got to pick up. Don't ever leave a job half done, because that reflects on you. And you need to be dependable in other people's sites. And, I never forgot that. In fact, even to this day, when I'm doing something, I can't leave a mess, because Dad kind of instilled in me, that's the difference maker. People won't take that extra step and do that. And so that really helped me a lot, to follow through and finish and be dependable, especially for people to call you back and maybe go work for them again. That was the whole idea. So those are some very important things in my life that Dad taught me that I've really seen in both of your lives too. So that's really encouraging to me. But the other thing about being together as a family, I really believe that having meals together like we did, was so important. Just spending time together, going on hikes. When we lived in Montana, we were able to go just behind our house. We had the Rim Rock. We had all this beautiful mountain scenery, and that we could take advantage of as a family. And they weren't expensive things, but we could just go and be a part of the mountains and hike and do things as a family, go get a Christmas tree or whatever it might be. Those are really special times that we spent together in the midst of work and all the things that go along with work. We were able to make time for that. So that was really special to me.
That's awesome. And maybe just to drill a little bit deeper, it sounds like the hauling business, because we heard a lot about the hauling business growing up, and I think in a really positive way, but that was a real formative time for you. And it was really hard manual labor. I mean, it was like people had these problems that like they couldn't figure out, and then they would call you and be like, can you move all this stuff or dig all this stuff up? But maybe just talk about how the impact of some of these jobs that we do, whether it's high school or college, that are difficult jobs, but the character building and maybe how that impacted you and your career, sort of almost like as a training, going through that.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it, Tim. I think when I think back, taking responsibility to go bid a job and to then take care of the job, see it to completion, and like I say, finish strong. Yes, we got the jobs that were always hard. Move something up to the top floor of an apartment complex. It was never the lower floor; it was always the top floor. We always seem to get those kind of jobs. They're really difficult landscaping jobs. But through that, I can remember getting a lot of confidence, learning to interact with people, to do right by people, to listen to them, and remember that they were the ones hiring me, so I had to do it to their satisfaction. It gave me so much confidence as I moved on and started to look for jobs, first teaching and then going on to work for an energy company. That experience really sort of molded and shaped me, because I was the guy. I had to follow through and do a good job. And God really instilled some confidence in just those simple projects that we did over the years, and got to work with some of my friends. Got to work with my brother throughout that process, so we developed relationships too in the process. But yeah, the work was hard, but it was fulfilling.
Yeah. There was kind of two concepts I was going to tie together that maybe that'd be great to hear a little bit more about, maybe where you got these values from. And I think it could have a lot to do with just grandpa having a really unique upbringing and background, but really just the idea of being a self-starter. And then also the idea of, I guess, frugality would be a good way to put it, just recognizing the importance of hard work and our initiative, and then not just squandering, those, the gains of all that hard work. And so do you want to kind of talk a little bit about that and maybe just a little bit about grandpa's upbringing? Because you saw him have so many challenges early on in his life. And so I'm sure some of that you instilled in us came from that.
Yeah, I think part about being a self-starter, I think it was my dad that told me, when you're in a class, sit up front. You want to get whatever the teacher's saying. Don't sit in the back and goof off. Get up front there and learn what you're supposed to learn. He really, just basic things like that. Don't waste time, take full advantage. One thing that Dad did in my life, I'll never forget. I was in fourth grade. I had to give a talk every week in fourth grade, get up in front of the class and teach. And I remember my dad spending time with me each week on my talk and helping me to learn to present and to learn to make it interesting and to learn to to be concise. And I'll never forget that. I mean, that really prepared me for a lot of opportunities later on in life. And when I was pitching in Little League, he'd be out there in the backyard trying to catch me, and I'd be throwing balls in the dirt. And he had this big board he put in front so I wouldn't hurt him, But he was always about preparation and preparing to do a good job. And that really, in my mind, is important. You get the opportunity, you have to go for it. You have to raise your hand and be willing to be the one, that does it, and not to hold back and hope someone else does it, but to jump forward and take some leadership and really do it. So that was something that I think Dad helped me with early on, and it was something that was important in my life. And then, take full advantage. We had a large family, so we were always concerned about, expenses and doing things frugally as we could. And that was also important too. And I think Dad was an encouragement in that area to me as well. But on the other hand, Dad was also a good example of reaching out to people in need. When I saw him do that on many occasions, even though there wasn't a lot of extra, Dad would do that. And so that was a really good thing for me to see. He spent a lot of time with homeless people and encouraged them and tried to help them. And again, growing up, seeing that was a really good example in my life.
Mm-hmm. It seems like there's a connection between hard work and frugality, because when money doesn't come easily, but you work hard for it, and especially there's really nothing like manual labor, because it's a manual labor like that, especially some of the jobs you're doing, it's really hard. It's really grueling. I mean, you're physically exhausted, tired, and so when you make money like that, and I think the benefit for me, I didn't do that same job. I did a lot of hard jobs in high school and college and worked a lot. And, you're working for not very much money, and you're working long hours and doing physical kind of jobs. And, you get a sense for the value of money, what it really costs to make $50,
Right.
it costs my time and effort and, some blood, sweat, and tears. And so I think that's part of that value of, I'm not just going to go blow money on things because someone gave me the money. I had to earn this money. And so I think that's something both Tom and I have always carried. We like to have nice things and spend money. We're not misers by any stretch of the imagination, but we also are careful with our money, and we don't do things we don't need to do. And we're trying to pass it on to our kids too. So.
Yeah, and I think it's true, with our kids today, grandkids for us, there's a tendency to want to give without the sacrifice, without your kids or grandkids experience the sacrifice of learning about money and work and how to earn things. But it's so important to have that sacrifice, I think, that we've talked about in the last few minutes, to really do the hard work and see that it's difficult and that it takes work and you have to work hard, and there's value in the money, and that makes everything just that much more precious, when you have it, and to really realize that. So we don't want to take that away from our kids. We want to make that part of their upbringing for them to be able to work hard and not just to give them everything, because then they don't really understand the work that goes behind achieving that. So I think we want them to know that for sure.
I was going to say that just, tying back to Grandpa, and it's neat to see and hear a lot of the things that you took from him, that we taken from you, that we want to pass on to our kids. And do you want to just give a short overview of his upbringing and just, military school, World War II, what he went through? Because I think when you think about it in that light, you think about that was considered and is referred to as the greatest generation. What they went to compared to today, where it's like, my toy broke. Can you see if Amazon can deliver the new one later today? For $9.99 or whatever. It's just like a completely different world. Your mom obviously talked a lot about, our grandma talked a lot about Great Depression and what that was like. But when you think about hard work, frugality, and these concepts we're talking about, it's sad that generation is mostly passing away now. But you want to get into that, because even though that was a hard generation for a lot of people, Grandpa had an especially difficult upbringing. But I think that probably shaped you in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think Dad really did. He lost his dad in an automobile accident at a very young age, and his mother had 4 boys and was trying to care for those boys, and in and out of the depression and very hard times financially. And the boys obviously eventually were sort of farmed out to foster homes and military school. So Dad didn't really have those parental relationships that we all want to have, mother and father there. He didn't really get to go to high school. He really decided at 15 to enlist into the Navy during World War II because he felt like, well, if I do that, at least I have somebody that's going to, care for me and I'll belong. So he did that and came out of the service, obviously, and then had to, on the GI Bill, get a college education and was able to go ahead and go to college and met my mom, obviously, and they were married. But I remember Dad he wrote about his life, and one of the things he said was, I didn't trust anybody. I couldn't trust anybody because everybody failed me growing up. I didn't really have anybody. So I definitely didn't trust people. And it was neat to see as he changed over time, God started to really work on his life, and Dad came to Christ, and he recognized he could trust Christ. And that changed everything in his life. Even though he had this very difficult upbringing, kind of estranged from his brothers and not really a real family environment, he had a real heart for each brother, reached out to them, wanted them to know Jesus, to really understand the faith, and really cared about them, even though they all had this dysfunctional upbringing where they were sort of all fending for themselves. So out of this, Dad came out of this environment where there was really no family, no togetherness, no meals together, all those things. But he instilled all those things with us, the four of us, me and my three siblings. We experienced a real family upbringing, and Dad was able to be very courageous. He was, I call him courageous in that he was willing to bring things up that needed to be brought up when it came to truth. He wasn't the kind of person that would let something lie if it needed to be stated or said. And even sometimes when he was maybe struggling in his faith, he would say so. And I love that about my dad because he really lived his faith, really lived who he was, and he cared about us. And when he came to Christ, he wanted us to know Christ, and he gathered us together and trained us, went over the Bible together, devotional times, even though it was brand new to him. This was all brand new to him, but he wanted to be faithful in that area. So just a tremendous admiration for him. Never talked about anything really negative. He never complained about anything about his upbringing. And I think he just was willing to really work hard and make the best of it. And God really blessed him. And fortunately, he was able to trust Christ, and that changed his life.
It's a great example of how the hard things in our life and the pain and the trauma that everyone experiences can be things that break us and that break our family, or they can be things that really form us and that can be healing and can be formative. And you see that with Grandpa. Obviously, he had a lot of struggles, and I think he had, back then, they weren't really necessarily diagnosing PTSD, but I think he for sure had PTSD from the war. And, he had lied about his age and enlisted at 15 and was over in the Atlantic, and hating the beaches and stuff like that. And, so there's a lot of things that he went through that were very difficult things. And he really struggled. I think really his whole life struggled. But what was neat, like you said, is he was very open about that and was very open about the struggle. God's a lot of humility and tenderness in him. Anyway, so it's just really neat to see that and the heritage of that. And like Tom was saying, we want to, take what you got from him and we got from him and then what we're getting from you. And then, hopefully we can pass on to our kids and some of those same values and character qualities that you've given us.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you're right, Tim. I mean, Dad could have just said, hey, I've had such a horrible upbringing. Nobody's going to expect anything out of me. I can just do whatever I want to do. But he did the opposite. And I would encourage anybody that comes out of a family situation that you don't have to let it in there. You can change. And for my dad, of course, and what I believe is through faith in Christ, he changed and was transformed, and everything changed for him. And he was such an encouragement to all of the grandkids and really building them up and encouraging them. So we saw a real transition in his life, and it was neat to be a part of that.
I was thinking another value that is pretty significant is just the idea of the importance of self-sufficiency or kind of just taking initiative. Obviously, we also were brought up with a very strong just faith tradition, Dad, because you were really one of the first people in your family to accept the Lord and become a believer. And so you and Mom really instilled that in our lives. We've kind of talked about that and family time, praying and Bible study and those things. But there's also the recognition that we also are responsible for what we're doing. Like we're responsible to take initiative. We're responsible to go. And then there was, Tim and I being boys, and you were always talking about when we would be men and when we would grow up and when we would need to take responsibility. And so part of that was getting those jobs at a young age. I also remember being probably like 6 or 7 and just knowing I'm going to go to college because you told us you're going to go to college, but there was also, but you're going to pay for your own college. And I knew that as just a little kid. And it helped because I had older siblings that were getting closer to that, but I was already saving money at that point. And so a lot of those jobs, we weren't like working these really difficult jobs growing up or doing landscape or whatever it is. So we could just like go buy toys. Like we were actually doing those jobs to save for college. So I remember already saving quite a bit of money from those $5 an hour or 50-hour weeks towards college. I remember you and Mom saying like, we're not doing your application for you at the colleges. Like we're not calling the advisors or whoever it is. Like you guys are responsible for that yourself. And a lot of my friends was like their parents were doing everything for them. And I was like, man, I'm having to do this. I'm having to apply for scholarships. I'm having to pay for school. Like this is a lot. I learned so much through that, that I've been able to take with me as I've grown older. And Tim, I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah, I think, it was very healthy not to have a backstop from the standpoint of I'm going to graduate college and then, I'm just going to go live at home, or dad and mom will pay for everything. We felt like it's up to us to go figure it out, go find a job, go support ourselves, and with the idea of, becoming men and eventually being married, having a family, leading our family. And it's sad because I think that that's something that maybe has been lost to some extent or is lacking in today's culture. A lot of young men are not leading. They're not going out and, getting a job and getting married and raising families. And that just what you guys impressed upon us is it's going to be up to you. It's going to be something that you need to do. I think that was a huge, formative blessing, for me.
Yeah, I think the thing that really occurs to me about when I obviously, Holly's not here, but the whole issue of learning, learning was something that both Holly and I felt very strongly that you guys had to own your learning. And in both cases, as you were growing up and learning, you both took full advantage. I know, Tim, both of you and Tom, you like to read. You really developed yourself and took full responsibility. So when it came time for college, you're ready to do the same thing because it wasn't something you looked to other people. You were excited about learning yourself. You were self-driven. It made it so nice for Mom and I because you guys were excited about learning. It wasn't a drudgery. It wasn't something that you were forced to do. And that sort of opened up everything for you because you went and got your degrees and then you were open and available and had the initiative to be available to whatever God wanted you to do. And both of you had opportunities before you got to where you are today that were learning opportunities for you, but you knew what you wanted to do and you had interest in that and you owned it yourself. You weren't looking for someone else to tell you what to do. You owned it yourself. And I think that's something that's really important about learning. So many stories I hear today about, my kids don't like school. They're not interested in school. They're in college and they just don't care. There's the importance right there of really training your kids to really enjoy learning and to see it as an opportunity for them to grow and excel in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Another value that I think has been really impactful for me is just the value of persistence, which might kind of go with hard work, but this idea of like once you decide on a path that you feel is the right path, not giving up. And just continue to work hard and be diligent. And just because things are hard doesn't mean you take a step back or you give up. And that's been so helpful for me because there's a lot of hard things in life, in relationships, in work. Maybe it's in school, in sports, where there's opposition and there's failure and there's obstacles. And I just think about it like going through the Great Recession, for me, and you can start to kind of question everything. I mean, should I be doing this? Am I doing the wrong thing? And I think just seeing that value in you of digging deeper and saying, no, I'm going to show up again. I'm going to keep pushing. I believe in this. And that was just an incredible value for me that's really helped me a lot. And I'm sure you probably agree, Tom, just being an entrepreneur, there's a lot of times where you feel like everything's going wrong, but you just keep going and things begin to work out over time.
Yeah, just the importance of day after day after day, just committing to doing your best and just being persistent with that. I think definitely. And as you were talking about that, Tim, I think humility too. We talk about humble, hungry, smart. It's our core values of our company. But Dad, you've really displayed a lot of humility. You've never been a person that's self-promoting or prideful. And that's really been an encouragement to both of us, because you had everything you just said about, grandpa was positive, but obviously, like Tim said, there's always challenges too. And you've never been the person that complains or would shine a light on any of that. You always were positive and would take responsibility. And I think that importance of taking responsibility, it's so key. Instead of just blame shifting or being a victim, but being a humble person and realizing we make mistakes. There's times where we do the right thing. There's times where we don't. We have to own our decisions. We have to own what we do. And you always taught us that. And that can be hard, but it's like telling the truth. That was something that was really important. And if we don't tell the truth, owning that and taking responsibility if we didn't, because we are going to have times where we do the wrong thing. And so I think that humility that you've displayed is so incredible. And to think now, I know we've talked a lot about as a family, just how incredible it is now with you now just turning 70, with Tim and I having our families. Like you have 24 grandkids, 7 kids. I mean, it's just incredible. We have family now all over the place. And it's just really special to see all the grandkids growing up. A lot of the grandkids are getting into their high school years. And it's neat. I know the little traditions that you've started of giving the grandkids when they turn 13 their own study Bible so that they can start having deeper understanding of God's word and just things that are important to you that you're passing on to those next generations of our kids, and things that you did for us in our lives. It's special that can continue on. There's challenges in generations. We don't have to always perpetuate those challenges to the next generation. We can take these positive things, and I think you've done that, and that's something that's really important to Tim and I that we want to be doing too.
Yeah, and I think that takes us into gratitude. I think when we think about our lives, and especially this week of Thanksgiving, we recognize sometimes we forget to be thankful. We forget to recognize just all the things that God has done in our lives. Everything that we have that's good comes from God, and we don't always recognize that. When we think about our families, we think about our jobs, we think about relationships, friends, and opportunities. God has just been so great and so faithful, and we just need to remember that in all areas of life, even when times get difficult, because, we talk about persistence, and that's when it's the most important. When we go through difficult times and we know it's the right thing, we stay focused on that and we do it. And God gives us the grace to do that with His help. We look to Him and He guides and directs us through it. But we are so grateful and so thankful for how God has blessed each one of us. And we just need to remember to start each day with that and recognize that.
Yeah, it's hard to do that. It's interesting. It's so hard to actually remember to be grateful. But I think that it's because I know for myself, there's a tendency to just want to perform. And so you're always just on to the next thing. And so you forget that even just the ability to be in the position you're in, to do good, to perform is because a lot of times it's because of someone else. And, it's because God has provided it. And so that's so important, I think, to remember. That's a great point, Dad.
Well, that's great. I think it's probably a good place to end, unless you guys, I don't know if there's anything else you guys wanted to say, but anything else come to mind, Tom?
The only thing else I was going to say was it's even the small things as we're talking about gratitude. There's things, Dad, that I remember. It's funny you talk about your dad catching you. I remember you catching me growing up and thinking about that, when you're a kid and I was a pitcher too, just like you taught me to be a pitcher, and I loved pitching. And you don't really realize how big of a deal that is, that your dad's getting down in the backyard, and you're throwing the ball as hard as you can and you're coming home from work to that. But I mean, my favorite memories, football has always been my favorite sport. My favorite memories when I'd be like, Dad, you want to go throw passes, and can I go run routes? And you would take me out. We would do it. And we did that for a long time. It's, still something I love to do today. You were a great athlete, great quarterback and pitcher, and played college soccer. And so we would just have a lot of fun playing sports together growing up. But those memories of you taking the time to go do that was always so much fun for me. And that's something I'm trying to remember with how busy I get and with my 5 kids, just taking time to do that with the boys or even the girls. Like if Annette wants to play volleyball or James wants to play baseball, and even reading. Like I remember you reading me the Narnia books. And now thinking back on that, I'm thinking, wow, Dad took the time. You had 7 kids and somehow you found the time to just read with me. And I remember you reading those books to me and just how special those memories are. So anyway, just really thankful for that. You taught us so many this life lessons, but then also you just spent time with us. And so just really special.
Well, I guess what I would say at the end is it's just such a privilege for me to be able to work with both of you. Can't believe I'd ever have this opportunity to be able to spend time with both of you, involved with the 100X Harvest and be able to experience, that ministry together and to know it was your idea and it was something that was important to you and David and both of you and David. And what a privilege for me to have that opportunity, most importantly, to be able to work with both of you who I love. You're both great dads and husbands and you're doing a great job. And I'm just thankful to be a part of it and to be able to be here.
Well, thanks, Dad. We feel the same way. We're so thankful that we get to work together and on the most meaningful, purposeful thing that we can, which is building the kingdom and doing the work that God's put in our heart. So it's awesome.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast. You guys have a happy Thanksgiving, and to all of our audience, enjoy time with friends and family and have a happy Thanksgiving.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. If you have questions about land you own in Texas, send us an email at texaslandguys@dmre.com and follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated.